Hello and welcome to Midnight Readings. Today we'll be reading Chapter 6 of The Night Guards. I'd like to thank Nico and Iron Pony for voicing, as well as my little brother who really wanted to help, Storm Clyde, so he's also voicing one or two of the guards. Here is Chapter 6.
So cold.
Anvil would never have imagined that being frozen solid could be such a lucid experience. He could still see, still hear, still think. The first two were significantly dulled, but they were definitely within his capabilities. Illumination was still provided by the lamps, although they were probably half burned or encased in ice as well. And he could hear the thumping of his heart. It was unnaturally loud in his ears. He then realized that he wasn't breathing. Panic rose in his chest, but was quickly replaced by curiosity when he noticed that he didn't seem to need it. At the moment, anyway. There wasn't any of the unusual burning in the lungs, or the overwhelming urge to start gasping for air. He just didn't need to breathe, apparently. But of course, the lack of suffocation didn't mean that he wasn't uncomfortable. Aside from the cold that was gradually gnawing into his bones, there was the matter of not being able to blink, or even move his eyeballs. He was literally staring at the same spot the whole time, with the constant stinging in his eyes, and the dreadful feeling that they might shrivel any moment. If he ever got out of this mess, he would never take blinking for granted ever again.
Speaking of getting out.
He strained against the ice, but nothing happened. That was expected. But the sudden sense of being trapped wasn't. It was a primal, frantic feeling, however small and far at the back of his mind, that he might not be able to free himself, ever. It was because of the ice. It was almost like being squeezed by the paw of a dragon. And the memory of his near miss in Cobbleville, mixed with his entrapment, was enough to stir his panic once again. He began to struggle, or tried to. He was so properly frozen that he could not move to gain any momentum. He couldn't throw his weight around. He couldn't gain leverage. He was well and truly stuck. His heart began to race.
No, not like this. Stupid pony. Calm down. Deep breaths. Right, no breathing. He forgot.
Time was running out. He might not need to breathe at the moment, but there were other things to worry about. The Wendigos for a start. He stilled his mind and focused on thinking of a way to free himself. One step at a time. His head had to come free first, then his chest. Just one movement, into one direction. Failing around would only waste strength. That he would only have one chance at it. He wasn't sure if he would have the endurance to keep at it for long, especially since breathing was out of the question. Once his heart had slowed down a bit, he strained against the ice once more, attempting to bend his neck downwards and curl into a ball to break the ice grip on his chest. He only hoped that the ice was a layer around his body and not a solid block. Slowly at first, but little by little, he began to pour his strength into fighting his crystalline prison. There was a tiny crack.
Yes.
And he redoubled his efforts.
Don't celebrate. Keep it.
But the seconds wore on and his strength was dwindling. And although the creaking sounds proved that something was happening, it was still not enough. Anvil couldn't tell if any chunks had broken off, or if there was any new cracks and the weaknesses in this ice that he could exploit. He had had enough. He threw in all of his reverence, ignoring the protest of his burning muscles and pounding heart. He could feel the ice trembling and a crack streaked across his field of vision like a lightning bolt. More cracks followed, and in his mind he was roaring with all his might. But it still wasn't enough. He could give it no more. He held fast, albeit with the ability to wriggle one foreleg slightly.
Oh, hayseed.
Now he needed to breathe, and couldn't. His head started to swim, and his sight and hearing became even duller. He started to drift off, with a strange throbbing sound in his mind, percolating each wave of fatigue. It was almost as bad as listening to a noble reciting his lineage. His heartbeat seemed to get louder, though pounding hard in his chest as if it was trying to snap his ribs, and it seemed to grow more violent by the second, until it was almost like getting bucked in the chest. Wait. He felt a dull thud and heard a loud crack. His mind was too muddled to know why, but he was abruptly happy about that. He felt another impact, and his head shifted slightly to one side. Another 2 or 3 followed, and he felt something crumble away from his face and chest. Anvil cried, and he suddenly found the strength to break free of the remnants of his icy shell. He failed wildly for a second, shaking off chunks of ice and blowing the offending slurry out of his nostrils and gasping for air. He then spent the next few moments yawning and blinking gratuitously, and he enjoyed every eye-watering second of it. Blinking. He knew could be such a pleasure. And the air, it felt surprisingly warm, like standing in the sun, even though he could see that the place was still covered in snow.
Satisfied?
Some pony asked. Anvil sneezed and turned round to the speaker. It turned out to be Hammer. He was panting, and behind him lay the shattered remains of his own prison.
My thanks.
Anvil mumbled as he scooped up his helmet and donned it.
I could almost kiss you.
Hammer gave him a look and simply said,
Pass.
He then began to scramble at the frost and ice in his ground. He was after the glowworm lamps, partially frozen and buried under the frost and snow. After catching his breath, Anvil followed suit, and before long they had covered their only source of light. Thankfully the lamps seemed to have shielded the worms from harm, and they were glowing as bright as ever. They exchanged a glance and cautiously made their way into the cavern out of which the Wendigos had come. Once he was inside, Anvil suddenly became aware of the alarming possibility that the stone door would roll shut and trap them inside. After all, it had opened of its own accord, once the magical seal had been removed. He voiced his concern, and they quickened their search. The place was like a tomb, rectangular in shape, and the wall of black rock coated in a thin layer of ice. It didn't take long to see that there was no place to hide anything. The ice was fairly transparent, and there were no tiles, secret hollows, or hidden buttons or levers. And worst of all, no elements of harmony. Just plain carved rock. It was no hiding place. It was a prison for the Wendigos, and probably had been all along. Discord had been plaguing them for fools.
The snake lied.
Anvil muttered as they hastily exited the tomb.
Yes, very shocking.
Anvil sneezed. Now that he had been free of the ice for some time, the air was starting to lose the illusion of warmth, and he felt a twinge of guilt when he saw the 8 frozen forms of the royal guards with varying degrees of surprise and alarm written on their faces. It would have been rather comical if he hadn't been in the same position a few moments ago. He trotted up to Hazelhawk and peered at him. He could almost imagine those blue eyes following his movements.
Should we?
He asked. Hammer shrugged.
Doesn't matter. We will anyway.
Without further ado, the big Pegasus began to pound one of the frozen guards, beginning with the head and working his way down. Anvil did the same for one of the others. Those they freed were first initially inclined to be suspicious and guarded, but were quickly convinced that freeing their companions was higher on the list of priorities. They could all start fighting again later, if they still felt like it. Breaking ice was tiring work. One by one the loyalists were freed. Most slumped on the ground with weariness, but Hazel and 2 others were quite alert after breaking out, albeit a little shaken. Once the last pony was free, Hazelhawk barked an order and the royal guard surged into formation whilst he darted into the cave. He returned barely a moment later and joined his companions. with an ominous expression on his face. They were seemingly back where they started, facing off against each other. Night guards against royal guards, except that this time half of them were shivering and it was unclear what exactly they were supposed to be fighting for, if not the now missing elements of harmony. Both sides eyed each other warily, with no pony inclined to make the first move.
This is ridiculous. Can we all agree to remain civil for the time being?
When no pony answered, Anvil slumped into his haunches and waved a hoof lazily.
Fine. If you still intend to capture us, make it quick. I'll have you know, though. You're going to have to carry me. I'm too tired to fly. Besides,
he added, when he saw that they were still being stubborn,
I believe we have bigger problems at Hoof.
the floodgates broke, and a couple of the loyalists thumped down on their haunches as well. Hazel looked outraged at first, but when he had whirled around to give them a tongue thrashing, another 3 of his band were already sitting on their haunches.
"Sorry, sir,"
one of them said apologetically.
"but the trader might have the right of it. Those things are headed to Everfree, and we may have to conserve our strength to make it back in time."
Wendigos. I never thought I would see one of those in my lifetime. I've heard so many stories.
One of them murmured.
"Updraft, now is not the time for more of your crazy."
Another loyalist interjected, but was cut off in turn of Hazelhawk.
Now that we don't have the elements, I don't suppose those stories have anything to say about defeating them.
The one called Updraft looked up thoughtful.
My nan used to say that they could only be defeated by love and friendship. Laughter and singing would drive them away as sure as fire melts snow.
Silence followed his words. Every pony stared incredulously at the guard, then at one another. Anvil was certain he knew what was going through their minds. The notion was absurd.
Laughter.
Hammer said flatly.
Singing?
Hazel added. Updraft shrugged.
"'Tis what I was told. They feed on misery and hate, so the opposite hurts them."
The 2 Pegasi shared a look, and both firmly said,
No.
"Hey, the second one is worth a try.
Some pony piped up.
Thundergale's singing is fit to drive a dragon from its hoard."
Some sniggering followed the remark, and the lean Pegasus, presumably Thundergale, scowled disapprovingly at the culprit.
"At least I can sing. You can't even carry a tune,"
he retorted.
Focus, every pony!
Hazel barked, but it was already too late. The tension between them had been severed, and his order was only half acknowledged.
Can we assume that we have a truce for the time being?
Anvil tentatively inquired. Hazel gave him a sour look and spared a glance at some of the shivering subordinates, and then grumbled.
Fine. You have your truce. At least until those things are dealt with. After that, I'm tossing you into the nearest dungeon.
Anvil ignored the threat.
You'll even call off the coup, I hope.
No such luck,
Came the reply.
Count yourselves lucky that you're not worth the effort for now.
Has it not occurred to you that we want the same thing? We want to end this. We want to help bring Luna back.
The Pegasus guard scowled.
Don't patronize me. Your own words condemn you. Luna is always the foremost in thoughts, isn't she? Never the ones she's harming.
He shook his head.
Equestria is having its rightful ruler back, and it will not be on your terms.
It appears that it might not be on yours either. The statue's already had half his way with his mess.
Hazel froze, then fixed a suspicious look on him.
Statue?
You know, the spirit of chaos and disharmony.
More blank staring, and this time the other guards were doing it too.
As in discord.
Anvil suggested, then raised an eyebrow.
I fail to see the relevance of the draconic wishes. It's a statue.
He could find nothing to say that. Summer Cloud was playing aims of her own, it seems, and he could see it in Hazel's eyes. The loyalists thought him a liar. Hazel backed a little way, and without breaking eye contact addressed his subordinates.
Back to the palace. Go.
Wisest thing you have said all night.
Hammer replied, then broke into a gallop for the exit. Anvil scrambled after him. Just a split second later, he heard thudding hooves in pursuit. He spared a glance back and was dismayed to see Hazel and the others rapidly gaining on them. It appeared they were going to have themselves another scruffle. 1 second, Hazel was a tail length away, slightly off to the side. The next, he was within biting distance, and after that, the big guard was galloping beside him. And it was then that he realized it wasn't a pursuit. It was a race home to Everfree. Being buffeted around by Arctic winds was not on Anvil's list of enjoyable pastimes. He had left the protection by the gap. The vertical blizzard had nearly smashed him back into the face of the mountain. As it turned out, the wind had picked him up like a rag doll and flung him into the nearest cluster of pines, and he had emerged only after receiving a sound of whipping from the skeletal branches.
What's a few more bruises and scratches?
The others had also been taken by surprise. There were cries of alarm, but as far as he could tell, all were able to adjust accordingly to the new turbulence, for they were soon all visible once more, battling the storm in formation. Small blessings, can't have too many of those these days. He did not relish the thought of having to haul any injured pony all the way home. As much as Anvil would have liked to outdistance the loyalists on the race home, it seemed that their pace were evenly matched. Aggravatingly so. If one group tried to outfly the other, the extra burst of speed would be so costly that the lagging party would only need to wait for the inevitable exhaustion in order to catch up. Such attempts had been made several times, but in the end every pony had made an unspoken agreement to conserve their energy instead, at least as evenly as their conscience allowed. The Wendigos had had a substantial head start on them, and the ponies' lives were at stake. After an hour of urgent flight, Anvil had seen all he needed to conclude that embarking on the Draconicus little quest was amongst the least commendable thing he had ever done. The sky was roaring with the force of the blizzard, and the land was blackened in a layer of snow that shone a pale blue in what little moonlight had made it through the clouds. Every now and then, coming from somewhere in the distance, he could hear the eerie shrieks and howls of the winter spirits as they wreaked havoc on equestrian weather. He thought he even saw at times, whirling and dancing around in the storm, taunting him and his companions. Once they were over settled land once more, they dropped down to lower ground, trading a speed for a better view of the town and villages below. It was not encouraging. Each and every one they spotted was practically buried in snow, and only the ones with larger buildings had any sign of inhabitants. The rest had half-faked tracks to mark the passage of ponies that had retreated to more sheltered places like caves or thick groves after their home had been wrecked by the roaring rains. Hazelhawk shouted an order, and 4 of the loyalists broke away from their group and angled off in the various directions. Anvil had been far too far away and the wind too loud for him to hear exact words, but he summarized that those 4 had been told either to render assistance to the ponies below or to get help from whenever the rest of the loyalists were hiding. He did feel guilty of not doing the same for the villagers, and was almost disgusted by his quickness to take solace in the reality that there weren't enough of them, loyalist or otherwise, to help all of the settlements at once. They would be better served if Luna was swiftly alerted to the threat in order to deal with the Wendigos. However, it appeared that the spirits were more interested in shaping the landscape to their own chilly designs than securing their newfound freedom. As they drew close to Everfree, he could see they were taking their sweet time circling the land and spreading the blizzard in their wake. It was as if they weren't even aware that they were former prisoners, and that their efforts at redecoration were soon to draw to the attention of those who might have the power to bind them once more. At least Anvil hoped that ignorance was the case. Indifference implied that nothing could be a threat to them, and it was not a comforting thought. Still, it was inevitable that the Wendigos would reach Everfree, and by the time Anvil and the others had the city in sight, the spirits were already spiraling around the outer reachers, raining snow and hail upon its inhabitants, and each circle brought them closer to the palace in its centre. The loyalists surged forward, and Anvil and Hammer pumped their wings to match their pace. Hammer broke off towards the library, whilst Anvil trailed Hazel, who was heading to the old barracks and presumably the dungeon beneath. As irksome as it was, he could not follow the three loyalists who had split up and gone into various sections of the palace. Anvil had no way of knowing if the coup had already begun, but on the off chance that it hadn't yet, alerting the rest of the night guards was a good place to start. He saw the great doors of the barracks swing open to admit Hazel, and nearly sprained his wing, breaking when the dozen other Pegasi and unicorns poured out. They did not look friendly. He slowed his stalling speed and dropped like a rock, narrowly missing a tackle from one of the Pegasi loyalists. He swung around and dodged another 2 or more attempts, and then beating his wings for all he's worth, making a frantic dash for the near balcony. There was a buzzing sensation in his hindquarters, immediately followed by a rapid deceleration. Anvil looked down and saw that half his body enveloped in a multicoloured aura. Unicorns! He thrashed in mid-air and felt the hold on him loosen. He grunted and thrashed some more, until only his tail was caught in the magical grip. One final jerk, and a mighty beat of his wings, and he was free, at the cost of half his hair on his tail. Barely a second later, he heard some pony rapidly approaching him from behind and bucked out wildly. He felt his hoof contact, but dared not look back. Instead, he plunged forward and crashed through the stained glass window. The loyalists did not follow, but sounds of incredible curses and shouted orders did. Luckily for him, he had crashed into the grand ballroom, which was the moment unlit and unoccupied. The coup had already begun. In the barracks, he spied a couple of ponies in the throng who had been wearing night guard armour. After catching his breath and checking the glass cuts were fairly shallow, he discarded his lamp and cautiously opened the doors, flying as quickly and silently as he could towards the royal library, keeping to the shadows as much as possible. He couldn't avoid being seen altogether, but at least the servants who did see him discreetly kept out of his way. In the wing above the library he found 2 night guards making their rounds. Peering around a corner, he identified them as Flicker and Tailwind, former recruits, Unicorn and Pegasi. They looked especially bored, hardly the sort of behaviour that ponies in the midst of treason were likely to exhibit, unless they were really good actors, but that was doubtful. He slipped out of the shadows and flitted over.
What? Oh, greetings, sir.
The Unicorn and Pegasus immediately straightened up when they caught sight of him. Good, they're not overly surprised.
Where's Captain Wally?
Anvil demanded.
Isn't he in the old barracks? I heard that the officers were all summoned there.
Flicker answered.
Weren't you the one who summoned them?
Tailwind looked somewhat confused.
Hey Seed, go find any others who aren't attending. Tell them to gather in the library, or to remain with the princess if they find her anywhere else.
Sir, what are we to tell them?
That Princess Luna commands it. And be on your guard. There are enemies in our midst. If any pony redirects you to the barracks, say yes, but do not go there. I cannot say more here. Go.
The 2 guards saluted and sped off, leaving Anvil to wonder whether he had taken an unnecessary big risk. Still, he judged those 2 clever enough to recognize trouble if they saw it. Without further delay, he spiraled down the stairwell into the library, wondering just how he was supposed to explain everything to Luna. However, his thoughts were interrupted when he heard the sound of brawl down below.
Stupid pony. Stop dreaming and watch where you're going.
There was a resounding thud and muffled groan, followed by a silence. When Anvil reached the bottom of the stairwell, he found Hammer standing over the battered body of an unconscious Pegasus in night guard armour. The notched right ear gave him away. Dizzle Sky,
Lucky find.
Hammer commented.
He wouldn't think so.
Anvil replied.
Why are you here? Where are the others?
The big Pegasus inquired as they proceeded with rolling Drizzle up in a convenient nearby tapestry.
They've taken the barracks.
His companion frowned.
How many?
All of them, I believe.
The hallway to the library bore marks of Hammer's struggle with Dizzle Sky, who had apparently been guarding the doors. Torches had been knocked from their scores. Tapestries had been dislodged, and carpets had been stretched the length of the corridor, was torn in several places. As they raced to the doors, Anvil's eyes flitted to the hole in the outer wall, through which Luna had smashed the marble statue not half a night ago. He ground his teeth. After cautiously pushing the door open, they found the library shrouded in darkness. Thick curtains had been draped over the grand century windows, and it appeared that all of the candles had long since gone out and remained unreplaced. It didn't take them long to find the princess, though. A little ways in, light was spilling out of her arcane archwing, and they saw a dark silhouette of the alicorn slumped over the pile of books on the floor. There were puddles of wax beneath the candle stands, but the enchanted trees all around provided all the light they needed. They rushed to Luna's side, but found that she was only asleep, snoring gently. She proved to be a light sleeper, though, for she woke at the slightest touch. What is it? I told you, no pony is to... She began irritably, but started and sat bolt upright when she realized who had woken her. You! Where have you been?
Where should I start?
Hammer brushed past him and said,
We are short on time, Your Highness. Everfree is in danger.
Luna looked as if she would have liked to have given them more of a tongue thrashing, but relented anyway. Very well. Speak, she commanded, but before they could say any more, a tentative
Hello, is any pony here?
rang out from the darkness of the library. A moment later, a band of 24 or so night guards cantered into the low light. Flicker was leading them, and he paused to bow to the dark Alcorn before panting.
All we could find, sirs. The others went to the barracks. Couldn't stop them.
Anvil noted that those present were mostly recruits. He recognized only 2 or 3 veterans. I require answers, Luna began with a more severe expression. As if on cue, the otherworldly shrieks of the Wendigos pierced through the stillness of the library, unmuffled by the thick curtains over the windows. Some of the night guards looked quite unnerved, whilst the Moon Princess was staring out of one of the bare windows. A lot of them, she finished distractedly. She then snapped out of her ravine and gave Anvil an expected look.
Wendigos, Your Highness.
He supplied. This explains so much. Luna began to pace, excitement visibly growing. The cold, the crops, everything. She paused, then added with a frown. And raises many questions as well.
There's one other thing. Hazel...
Anvil didn't hear the rest of Hammer's words. They were drowned out by the sound of 100 glass windows shattering, followed by a howl of the wind as snow and ice poured into the library. Shelves and thousands of books crashed to the floor, adding to the chaos. Instinctively, every pony huddled together and braced themselves against the indoor blizzard. When things had died down a little, everything was covered in frost. Princess Luna shook herself and glared at the nearest window. More shrieks came from without, and one of the shimmering spirits streaked past, leaving a glittery frost stream of mist in its wake. She then turned to them and said, Night guards, evacuate the palace. I want no pony unskilled in combat to be anywhere near this place. And you, she added, focusing on Anvil and Hammer, we will speak more later. We have an axe to grind.
Wait.
Anvil began, but the world exploded in a flash of light. A split second of nothingness, and the world exploded again, back into existence. Anvil blinked and shook his head. Never liked teleporting. Hammer and Luna were by his side, together with 4 unicorn night guards who looked as if they couldn't quite decide whether to be proud or worried that they were hoof-picked by the princess to fight alongside her. They were atop the palace's highest turret, opposite the ruined Tower of Harmony. Black clouds hung, churning over the outskirts of Everfree, swollen and infused with a hail and a flashing of lightning. But the sky directly above the city was clear and starless, with the full moon right in its centre, a cold blue sphere in the eye of the storm. And up above was galloping on thin air were the 3 howling spirits. Dark spots were coalescing in the air between them, growing larger by the second. Anvil squinted. They looked like melon-sized hailstones, fell, screaming towards them. Anvil crouched and sprang to the side to avoid being brained, but the icy chunks never hit the floor. Instead, they shattered harmlessly against the turret dome that Luna had conjured over them. The shield vanished, and they were shown to the frost. Winter spirits! I am going to count to 3, and you have best be gone when I am finished. If one of you so much as sprinkles another snowflake on my land, I am going to make you rue the day you first drew breath. The Wendigos ignored her and continued to gallop in a circle high above. 1. The spirits carried on. Anvil felt a chill creeping up his leg, and started violently when he realized that it was ice. The floor was frozen and his hooves were stuck. He hurriedly wrenched 1 foot away. One of the unicorns swore. 2. The ice continued to spread. Luna's frown deepened and her horn began to glow. A second later, Anvil felt warmth emanating from the floor, and sighed as the ice melted away. His unicorn companions seemed equally relieved. When he glanced upwards, the Wendigos were no longer galloping. They had drifted much closer to the turret, and were silently observing them, barely 100 feet away. 3. Luna breathed. The Wendigos shrieked in defiance, and flew forth a howling blast of frigid air that glittered with icicles. Anvil flinched, but only felt a shower of warm water. He blinked and shook droplets of water off his wings. Steam was coming off the alicorn's horn, and she was grinning at the spirits. "I've been idle for far too long. I take great pleasure in teaching you a lesson." She then spread her wings and said, "Hammer, Anvil, with me. We're going to play a little game. And you," she added, with a sidelong glance to the unicorns, "I want barriers for my champions, strong ones." With that said, she sprang into the air. Anvil took to the sky after her and felt static in the air as a translucent sphere materialized around him. Through the corner of his eye, he spied Hammer surrounded by a similar sphere of a different hue. As they gained height, the Wendigos let loose another blast of frost, and Anvil couldn't help but cringe as he watched pointy shards of ice bursting into white powder on the magical shield just inches from his face.
Please don't break. Please don't break.
A moment later, the air ahead was clear once more, and he saw Luna retaliate with a bolt of lightning. It struck one of the spirits squarely in the face, and the other 2 scattered when it screamed in fury. Anvil saw an opportunity and took it. He surged upwards and tumbled to deliver a blow with his hind hooves. The lack of resistance so surprised him that he nearly stalled. There was a splash of coldness, and suddenly he was on the other side of the Wendigo, and chilled to the bone.
This complicates things.
The world was a blur. Anvil couldn't remember how long they'd been fighting in the air.
Dodge, back, drop, rise, dodge again.
His barrier had long since been whittled away, and Luna had ordered the exhausted unicorns to retreat, lest they collapse entirely. Hurting the Wendigos was difficult enough without adding unconscious unicorns to the mix. The spirits were more spirit-like than previously thought, and could not be harmed by physical blows. It was like bucking thin air. Cold air. In response, Luna had tossed another enchantment on them. Their hooves now crackled with pure electricity, and they were finally able to do some damage. That is, if blackening their hides a little counted as damage. Their spirits were still as fast and energetic as ever. Despite the blows they had successfully landed, Anvil could see no end to the aerial battle any time soon. It was dragging on and on. Luna realized it too, and was growing restless. She flew aggressively, forcing on one particular spirit in the hopes of wearing it down, throwing bolt after bolt of lightning at it, and the other 2 were taking advantage of her single-mindedness. They had her flanked, and it fell to Anvil and his friend to constantly harry them and prevent them from properly ambushing the Moon Princess.
Weave in, weave out, dodge, back, drop, rise.
It was almost becoming like a dance. A long one. But then Pony broke the routine. The leading Wendigo suddenly accelerated upwards at a sharp angle, and Luna matched the maneuver perfectly. Anvil and Hammer, not so much. They could not react so quickly. But the other Wendigos could, and did. They stormed past Anvil right up to the Moon Princess, who had not yet realized that there was no pony left to guard her back. One charged from behind, and her decision to conserve magic by maintaining a barrier only in her front turned out to be a mistake. The Wendigo formed an icy boulder with its breath and plunged the dark alicorn. Her barrier flickered for a second before disappearing entirely. The crackling enchantment on Anvil's hooves fizzled out too. Unprotected, the Moon Princess was then caught in the middle of 3 cone-shaped blasts of freezing breath, and Anvil and Hammer were too far away to help. Luna fell from the sky, encased in a huge ball of crystalline ice, and it was heading right his way. He barely had enough time to swerve aside, and could only watch in a morbid fascination as the frozen mass crashed right through the roof of the great hall. A large cloud of dust rose from the crater as tiles of masonry tumbled in. Half a moment later, Anvil felt a chill whoosh of air as the 3 Wendigos surged past him and into the ruined great hall. They had completely ignored him and his companion. Anvil followed them, but dare not engage. Instead, he merely darted off to the side and watched from behind the pillars. Even Hammer did the same. Not the most chivalrous thing in the world, but it became obvious that they could do little harm to the spirits without Luna's help. So, they watched. The Wendigos circled in the air above the crackled mass of ice, oblivious to the debris raining from the shattered roof above. They continued to breathe blast upon blast of frost on the trapped alicorn, and the ball grew and grew, until it was practically a mountain of jagged, glassy ice, almost reaching to the broken vaulted ceiling. It was only when the Wendigos calmed down, and they began to hover serenely over the mound, whispering to themselves in little gusts as if they were complimenting the merits of a fine work of art. There was no sign of Luna. Anvil waited, but as the seconds passed, there was not so much as a flicker of light from within. There was so much ice. He couldn't imagine what it must be like to have a weight of a mountain bearing down upon her.
Sweet Celestia, no.
Anvil was never one to be prone to rage, but at that moment he felt stirring in his heart. A fiery heat coursing through his veins. A redness coloured his vision. He wanted to hurt some pony, and the 3 winter spirits were right there, mocking him with their casual indifference, gloating over their success. He found strength in a place he had never knew he had.
Anvil.
Hammer warned.
Spare me.
He growled back. He didn't care if he got himself in a fix again. He just wanted to make the spirits sorry for what they'd done, even if it meant kicking and screaming in their face until he was just another ice cube in the blizzard. He flew out of the cover, with one hoof pointed forward, feeling the build-up of static electricity as he gained speed. The Wendigos took notice and breathed at him. When he felt ice crusting over his body, he vehemently thrashed in mid-air and felt a rush of exhilaration as the ice crumbled away.
Not this time, you little hayseed.
He roared in defiance as he shrugged off another blast. Seethed from within, he felt a satisfying crack of electricity when he slammed all his built-up static energy into the Wendigo. He angled off to make another round, but a spiky cluster of ice suddenly erupted from the ground, and he ploughed right into it, smashing the thing into 100 fragments. The pieces rained on the floor as he sprung out of control, and crashed headfirst into a pillar. He saw more stars than he could count.
You really like doing this, don't you?
Dazed and bleeding, Anvil struggled to his hooves, turning around and found himself face to face with one of the Wendigos. Behind it, he spied Hammer, harassing the other 2, dodging their breaths and bucking debris at them in return. The spirit in front of him snorted. and he returned his attention to it, noting, with a trickle of amusement, that there was a tiny scorch mark on its side, and a fresh one at that. It was still smoking. Not quite as good as Luna's magic, but still.
Got you.
He wheezed. He threw an insolent grin at the Wendigo, and spat out a broken tooth onto the floor, beneath his forehoofs. He then took off his helmet and flung into the spirit's face. It passed right through him, and clattered off somewhere behind him. The Wendigo didn't even blink, it only softly rumbled and drew a breath. Anvil closed his eyes. Instead of the blast he'd expected, he heard a deep crack. He opened his eyes and saw the Wendigo when its face turned towards the icy mound, hoofing at the ground nervously. The others were simply distracted, and he saw Hammer taking the opportunity to get behind cover once more. His armour was covered in icicles, and one wing was bent at an unusual angle. He heard another crack, followed by a rumble. Luna. There was a light coming from the depths of the mound, flashing a bright, angry purple. He felt his grin slowly return. Massive fractures appeared on the surface, and the whole thing began to shudder. And just then it occurred to him that standing around like a simpleton was an absolute brilliant idea. After all, what was the worst that could happen?
Stupid pony, move!
He was just about to duck behind a pillar when a concave wall of air slammed into his back, followed by sharp bruising shards. He was thrown forward and buried under a pile of icy debris. He came up, coughing and spluttering. When he turned to the remains of the mound, he had to lift a hoof to shield his eyes from Luna's radiant form. The aura around her faded after a moment, but lightning continued to crackle in her eyes. She raised her horn skyward, and a silver beam of light shone down from the moon above. For a moment, all was quiet. Even the Wendigo seemed mildly curious. Luna stood still as a statue, staring at the moon. Anvil squinted. Things were twinkling in the moonbeam. High up, but they were drawing closer. A faint whistling became audible, and it grew until it became a high-pitched fireworks-like screech. His heart leaped when he saw the twinkling things transform into 6 falling stars, each with glittering trails of different colour.
So, that's where she's been keeping them.
At the same moment, the Wendigo seemed to have realised what was in store for them, for they screeched and began to pelt the dark alicorn with ice shards and frosty wind. Luna ignored them all. Their attacks simply bounced off the newly conjured barrier around them. In the aftermath, there was a substantial snowdrift in a ring around her, and the elements of harmony whipped round in rapid series. Once a shoulder level, the brightly coloured crystals began to circle around her, shining brightly. And for the first time, Anvil saw worry written in the Wendigo's face. The Moon Princess gave them a toothy grin. "My turn," she said with great relish. Anvil couldn't recall Luna having teeth that sharp. There was a bright flash, and Luna was engulfed in a cloud of mist that closely resembled the appearance of her mane. Anvil glanced around, expecting her to reappear and ambush the spirits, but nothing of the sort happened. Instead, the mist reached out with 3 smoky tentacles, and wrapped around the ghostly forms of the Wendigos. They shrieked in alarm. He could see them struggling in the grip of the misty cloud, and the steam was coming off them whenever they were in contact with it. One of them broke free and spat icicles into the centre of the mist, but the cloud simply contorted and opened up an empty space in the middle. The icicles shattered harmlessly onto the stone floor.
That's new.
Anvil realised that Luna wasn't hiding in the mist. She was the mist. A second later, the mist contracted and concealed back into the dark alicorn, along with the 6 elements of harmony. She was chuckling gleefully. Like it? She mocked. We'll have some more. Purple lightning forked from her horn and struck the windigos. The nearest spirit was thrown against a wall, and the impact left a circular splatter of frost on the masonry. Another was smashed out a glass window, and the last was blasted backwards into the sky. There was a panicked shriek, which grew fainter by the second. It seemed that one thrown out the window had had enough, and was beating a hasty retreat. The other 2 weren't quite ready to give up, though. They encircled Luna, and attempted to freeze her once again. She merely huffed and conjured a barrier that rapidly expanded into a sphere of force, thrusting back anything that wasn't nailed down. Anvil received a faceful of frost, and was thrown off his hooves. Get out of my home! Luna roared. Each word was punctuated by a crack of thunder, and each crack came with a searing bolt that lashed at the windigos. One spirit fled through the hole in the roof, screeching in pain, but the other, the one that had been smashed into the wall, tried to flee through the doors of the great hall. It turned out to be a mistake. Luna transformed back into mist and reached for the spirit, with massive claws. The Wendigo failed to avoid her. There was a hissing sound like water landing on searing hot metal, and the steam began to come off the Wendigo in clouds. Anvil shifted uncomfortably as he watched as it struggled in Luna's grasp. She refused to let go. And then it began to scream. It was unlike any sound that he had heard before. A piteous howl that made his heart shrink and his resolve falter. A few minutes ago, he would have been quite eager to torture the spirit himself, but now that he was witnessing it, he wanted nothing more than to cover his ears and shut out the terrible noise. The spirit couldn't even scream properly from its pain. Its cry was frequently interrupted by irregular gasps and choking sounds. He gritted his teeth.
This is wrong. Your Highness!
He cried. The cloud that was Luna appeared to have heard him, but instead of releasing the Wendigo, it raised the misty arm and ground it into the floor. It then reverted to Luna, who stood tall over the now withered form of the winter spirit. Electricity crackled on her horn and she began to lower it.
Your Highness, you have defeated them. Perhaps that is enough.
Hammer appeared from behind a pillar, limping slightly.
Besides,
he added, pointing a hoof up,
you have an audience.
Anvil followed the direction of his hoof and groaned inwardly, when he saw the faces peering over the edge of the broken ceiling. Wonderful. Now they choose to make their appearance. Even before he'd finished thinking, the doors burst open and more loyalists of the Royal Guard, in Royal Guard armour, poured into the room. There must have been over 50 of them, and amongst their ranks were a few night guards. Luna's eyes darted around wildly, and she growled, "What is the meaning of this?" She stomped a hoof, and the impact went to send a resounding boom through the palace. "Guards!" she thundered. "They cannot help you now." Hazelhawk trotted forward. "Your guards have been arrested for treason against the crown. Even as we speak, they are being sent to the dungeons." Luna didn't seem to hear. "Don't just stand there, fools! Do your duty!" she snapped at those garbed in dark armour. "They're not yours, Nightmare Moon. They never were." That seemed to get her attention. She was dumbstruck, and she began to stare at one guard after another, as if she'd only just noticed their presence. The Wendigo was momentarily forgotten, but it did not move from its place. It simply lay there and with its chest heaving slowly. Luna grew increasingly agitated. "To me!" she said.
Your Highness.
Luna threw him a look. It was difficult to read. Was that hurt he saw in those eyes? Or was it anger? Maybe a mixture of both. He sighed and mentally hung his head.
Until my liege release me, coward.
He filtered to her side and Hammer limped over a few seconds after. They were surrounded. My own guards, she said stiffly. She surveyed their opponents. There will be no mercy for traitors. The glow in her horn intensified, and the loyalists tensed for combat. Anvil grimaced.
Where does it end?
Enough, Sun Pony whispered. It was softly spoken, but it carried on the air as well as any shout, echoing throughout the great, ruined hall. Anvil knew that voice. So did Luna. The injury around her horn glutted out, and she exhaled slowly, and deliberately staring straight past the line of royalists before them. A radiant figure trotted forward, and the throng parted as she approached. Her hooves and horn were like hot embers, her mane like calm smoking flames, but her eyes were sad. That is enough, Luna. That is Chapter 6 of The Night Guards. I hope you enjoyed, and I apologise for this being up late. But I had a few family issues to deal with, as well as computer problems, so hope you enjoyed it otherwise. Thanks again to Nico and Iron Pony.
As well as my brother, Stormcloud.
And I'll see you all next week. Stay brony!